wreck did not look smaller up close. That was the first thing that struck Voss when the salvage shuttle finally brought her within a kilometer of the alien hull, 11 hours after the guns went quiet. She had half expected the distance to have inflated it somehow, the way fear inflates things seen in the dark. Instead, it hung before her viewport in all its impossible enormity, a mountain with no peak, trailing that slow, iridescent cloud of frozen crystalline debris from the wound the Resolute had torn in its side. The cloud had not dispersed. It had grown denser, the material continuing to vent and freeze as whatever internal systems still functioned aboard the vessel slowly gave out one by one. It caught the distant sun and scattered it into colors that had no names in any human language Voss knew. She noted this carefully in her log. She noted everything carefully now, because the alternative was to stop moving, and she was not yet ready to find out what happened when she did. The science team, assembled from the Resolute's surviving crew and a hastily redirected research vessel that had been cataloging Kuiper Belt objects 200,000 kilometers away, worked with a focused, quiet urgency that Voss recognized as the professional cousin of terror. They moved along the alien hull in magnetic harnesses, running instruments across its surface, feeding data back to the shuttle in a continuous stream that the Resolute's remaining systems were barely keeping pace with. The hull's surface, seen up close, was not the uniform obsidian it had appeared at range. It was textured in ways that changed depending on the angle of observation, the folds and geometries shifting between what appeared to be structural elements and what appeared to be something else entirely, something that had no analog in any human engineering discipline, and that the lead scientist aboard the shuttle described in her preliminary report only as intentional in a way we cannot yet categorize. The interior, accessed through the breach, was worse. Voss pulled herself through the wound in the hull and understood immediately that the vessel had not been designed around human assumptions about space. There were no corridors in any conventional sense, no defined floor or ceiling, no orientation that suggested its builders had ever needed to anchor themselves to a surface. The internal geometry was radial, every chamber opening onto a central axis from which other chambers branched and rebranched in patterns that suggested less an engineered layout and more the internal structure of something biological. A bone. A hive. Something that had grown into its shape rather than been assembled into it. What they found inside rewrote nearly every assumption the science team had carried through the breach with them. The vessel's navigation system, if that term could be applied to something so fundamentally unlike a navigation system, contained records. Not in any format a human computer could directly parse, but in a format that a physicist named Rahul Mehta, working 20 sleepless hours straight in the shuttle's cramped lab, managed to partially decode by treating the data not as language, but as mathematics. And what the mathematics described, once Mehta had mapped its basic grammar, was not a mission. It was a catalog. The vessel had been here before, not recently, and not alone. The records described a survey pattern, a systematic sweep of the outer solar system conducted across an interval of time that Mehta initially calculated as decades, and then, rerunning his figures 3 times with increasing discomfort, revised to centuries. The alien civilization had been watching humanity's solar system for longer than the steam engine had existed. They had watched, recorded, cataloged, and determined something, some threshold crossed or condition met, that had finally prompted this visit. The vessel was not a warship. It was, by every measure Mehta could extract from the data, a first contact assessment probe. Its purpose had been to approach, evaluate the dominant species' capacity for resistance, and transmit that evaluation home. Voss read Mehta's report in the dim red light of the Resolute's half-powered bridge, and felt the cold weight of what it meant settle into her bones like deep space chill. The vessel had transmitted before the battle. The duration and content of that transmission were impossible to determine from the wreck's remaining systems, but the fact of it was not. Something, somewhere out in the dark, now knew that humanity existed, that it had fought back. And how? She filed her own report to Earth with steady hands, and then sat very still for a long moment, looking at the starfield through the viewport, understanding for the first time in her life that she was not looking at emptiness. She was looking at distance, There was a difference, and it mattered enormously.